let's talk about a name you probably should know, but maybe don't. Flavius Belisarius. They often call him the last of the Romans, and for good reason. This is one of history's absolute greatest generals. A guy who reconquered huge chunks of an empire with just a fraction of the resources his enemies had. So how on earth did he pull that off? Let's get into the story of his genius. Okay, let me paint you a picture. The year is 537 AD. We're in the city of Rome, the old heart of a fated empire, and it's under siege. A massive Ostrogoth army is camped right outside the gates, and they plan to starve out the tiny Byzantine garrison that's holding the city. Inside, their commander, our guy Belisarius, is facing odds that are, well, just completely insane. I mean, really think about that. This was the problem staring Belisarius right in the face. He has a tiny force, miles and miles of ancient walls to defend, and a relentless enemy. His solution? Well, it would become the stuff of legend, and it perfectly shows off his totally unique way of thinking about war. But, to really get his brilliance in Rome, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to go back to where he was forged, the brutal, unforgiving eastern frontier of the empire, because this is where Belisarius learned his craft and where he developed his greatest weapon. And what a weapon it was. Meet the Bucelardi. Now, these were not your standard-issue soldiers. This was his personal army of 7,000 elite heavy cavalry, loyal only to him. And get this, they were incredibly versatile. They could fight like horse archers, peppering the enemy from a distance with bows, and then, on a dime, they could charge in with lances and swords like heavy shock troops. They were his secret sauce, his trump card, in pretty much every single battle. And this right here, this was his training ground. We're talking about the long, bloody, grinding wars against the powerful Sassanid Persian Empire. Out here, fancy maneuvers were nice, but tactics, deception, and the raw ability to adapt on the fly, those were the only things that kept you alive. His early career, honestly, was a total roller coaster. He took some tough losses, learned some hard lessons about command, but then you get the Battle of Dara, where he used these brilliantly simple pre-dug trenches to funnel and then absolutely smash a much bigger Persian army. After later defeat, he gets called back to the capital, and he arrives just in time for the city to explode in the Nika Riots. With the emperor's throne about to go up in flames, Belisarius ruthlessly crushed the revolt, slaughtering thousands. It was incredibly brutal, but it proved one thing beyond any doubt: his absolute loyalty to Emperor Justinian. And that loyalty? It paid off. Big time. Justinian gave him his first truly great command: go and reclaim North Africa from the Vandals, a kingdom that had broken away from the empire about 100 years earlier. Now, on paper, the war was all about politics. The Vandal king Gelimer had overthrown a ruler who was friendly with the Byzantines. But let's be real, the real prize was Africa itself. It was the breadbasket of the old empire. So with this goal, Belisarius set sail with a pretty small force, only about 17,000 men, not exactly a huge invasion army. What happened next was just astonishing. In the span of just 9 months, Belisarius completely toppled the Vandal Kingdom. The whole thing. It was a military masterclass in speed and decisive action, doing in a few months what should have taken years. So, how'd he do it? Well, it was a mix of things. First, iron discipline. He literally executed his own soldiers for stealing fruit, just to make sure the local population saw him as a liberator, not a conqueror. Second, deception. He told everyone he wasn't there to conquer. Oh no, he was just there to put the rightful king back on the throne. And third, pure opportunism. At the key battle, the Vandal king saw his brother get killed and just stopped the fight out of grief. Belisarius seized that exact moment, shattered the Vandal army, and took their capital. Just like that, the war was pretty much over. So, Africa's back in the empire. Justinian must be thrilled. But he immediately sets his sights on the ultimate prize, Italy itself. This campaign, the Gothic War, would be Belisarius' longest, toughest fight, and it brings us right back to where we started, that desperate siege in Rome. He kicked things off by taking Sicily pretty easily. Then he moved on to the mainland and captured the fortress city of Naples by sneaking his men through an old, forgotten aqueduct. I mean, that's a classic Belisarius move right there. By December of 536, he'd marched into Rome without a fight. But the easy part was over. The real test was about to begin. And the siege of Rome, man, this is where you really see his genius shine. The Gothic king Vitiges shows up with a massive army. Belisarius is outnumbered, big time. So what does he do? He refuses to just sit there and hide. Instead, he launches these constant, lightning-fast raids with his cavalry, hitting the Goths hard and then vanishing before they can react. When they finally launch a huge assault with giant siege towers, Belisarius gives a simple, brilliant order: ignore the soldiers, shoot the oxen. With the animals pulling the towers dead, the whole assault just grinds to a halt. It was incredible. After more than a year, the Goths finally gave up and retreated. But, his biggest problems weren't always the enemy in front of him. Reinforcements finally arrive, but they're led by a court official named Narses. And these two guys, they clashed immediately. Belisarius was cautious, methodical. Narses wanted these bold, risky attacks. It got so bad that Narses just straight up refused orders, arguing that Belisarius wasn't acting in the state's best interest. It basically paralyzed the whole war effort for a while, until Narses was finally sent home. All of this built up to his most audacious move yet. He has the Goths trapped in their capital, Ravenna. They're desperate, so they make him an incredible offer. They'll surrender if Belisarius agrees to become the new Western Roman emperor. And Belisarius says yes. He accepts. The city gates are thrown open, he rides in with his elite bucellarari, and the moment he's inside, he drops the act. He declares Ravenna captured in the name of Emperor Justinian. It was an absolutely brilliant deception that won the war without a bloody final battle. Now, this victory should have been his crowning achievement. A parade, celebrations, the works. But his success, and especially that little offer of a crown, had made Emperor Justinian back home deeply, deeply suspicious. You could actually see him right here, immortalized in this famous mosaic in Ravenna, standing right next to the emperor he served. But despite all his incredible victories, despite his unwavering loyalty, he was recalled from Italy. Justinian could never bring himself to fully trust a general who was so popular and so successful. And that's really the tragedy of his career. His own genius was often seen as a threat. Because of all this, for his service to an empire that was still Roman in name but was changing fast, and for the way he embodied all those old virtues of duty and tactical brilliance, he's remembered as one of the last of the Romans. He was like a final living link to the great military tradition of Caesar and Scipio. The military historian B.H. Liddell Hart summed him up perfectly. He said Belisarius was a master of turning his own weakness into a strength and his opponent's strength into a weakness. And that's exactly it, right? He took being outnumbered, his weakness, and turned it into a strength by using speed and cunning. Then he took his enemies' huge numbers, their strength, and made it a weakness by hitting their supply lines and morale. He just flipped the script. Which brings us to one last big question. After reconquering Africa and Italy, after outsmarting countless enemies and proving himself one of the greatest military minds in history, why isn't Belisarius as famous as Alexander the Great or Napoleon? Why isn't his a household name? Maybe the answer says a lot less about him and a whole lot more about us, and what parts of history we choose to remember.